As my parents can attest, I have always loved books. As a kid, I read novels and nonfiction and comic books and comic strips and fortune cookies and cereal boxes. And believe it or not, I read Shakespeare, Shakespeare plays, at least one a year from 5th grade through the end of high school. And I also loved to write. As an only child, books were often some of my best friends. But when I wrote essays and letters by hand to people who read them, most of the time, and poetry and short stories and even plays through middle school and high school. But my first ambition was always to be a doctor. So in college, I was a pre-med government major who managed to take a lot of English classes. I kept writing, but pretty much confined myself to assignments and personal essays. And then I went to medical school, and at least one of my med school classmates I see right there, right? And yeah, and I don't know if Jeff is here, but when you go to medical school, it's like learning the hardest science of your life while also learning a new language and while trying to learn how to listen, like really, really listen to people so that you can help them. So I didn't write much then either, except kind of medical notes, which were horribly boring. And I helped run our second year show, a musical production called Thoracic Park, which was, which definitely dates me, but it was awesome, and it was really fun and collaborative. And then came residency, during which I learned so much, but I was often working 100-hour weeks and barely saw my living room and barely saw my husband. Shortly after that, we had our first child, and that was like a whole new level of busy. That's like being on call every night. And then I started working as a primary care doctor, and we had our second baby. So writing pretty much stopped. So I want to read you the opening paragraph from Midsummer. The song from the woods first called to me on a bright June morning while I sat on the back porch swing rereading my favorite cookbook. I could only hear a few notes, a small taste of a half-remembered melody that meandered through the air, but I was instantly hungry to hear the whole thing and discover where it came from. I crossed the yard and stopped at the edge of the woods. As the music drifted toward me like an irresistible aroma, I held my breath and stepped into the trees. So that's my main character, Mimi, being called by something mysterious, but it's something that also seems strangely familiar. And that was me with writing. So in 2011, my kids were in school, my medical practice was established, and I felt the call to do something creative again. And so I took some classes online, and I figured out during taking classes that I wanted to write novels for kids because those were the books in my life that had the biggest influence on me. And so I started to think about ideas for a book. So I had this memory from my childhood. So my dad, wave dad, he didn't travel much, but when he did travel, he was sometimes gone for up to a week. And I, having an overactive imagination, began to wonder, what if the person who came back wasn't actually my dad, but somebody who looked exactly like him? Like, how would I know? So I had like a series of tests, like things that only my dad would know. And luckily it was always him. But then when it came time to write a story, I was like, well, what if there was a girl whose dad came back from a trip and was acting really weird, and she was the only one who noticed? How would that happen, and what would happen next? Then I thought about imaginary friends, which I always thought was just a really cool idea. And then I thought, what if there were an imaginary friend who was actually real? And then, inspired by the woods of Concord, where I walk my dog every day, I thought about what kind of imaginary friend might live there. And that's when I harkened back to my childhood reading of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and two very specific lines, which I will not tell you now because it's a spoiler, so read the book, that would link to the Indian American family that I was creating in my story. And then I had the broad outline of the whole story. Like, just because you love books and you know how to read books doesn't mean you know how to write a story. So I drafted this book in 2014, and I revised it over 2015 and 2016. And I started querying agents in 2017, and then I entered a contest called Pitch Wars, where unagented authors apply to be mentored by more experienced authors. And I somehow got in, and I had an incredible mentor who made some amazing suggestions in an edit letter, which required eliminating a character from my book. So I basically rewrote the book in 2 months. And then, directly because of that, I signed with my amazing agent in November 2017, and we sold this book in 2018, and here we are today.